Hi guys, it's Jess from Honest Fiction, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I am going to be sharing my November TBR. Alright guys, so I'm going to be starting this TBR off a little bit differently. I have a very big announcement that I have been very excited and yet very nervous to share. But as of November 1st, I will no longer be working in education. So I'm not going to explain exactly what I used to do or what company I worked for. I'd like to keep that completely private. But I did used to work with kiddos, and I had been doing it for the last 11 years. And I finally decided that it was time for a change. Now, I absolutely loved what I used to do, and this has been one of the hardest decisions of my entire life. I'm going to try not to break down and cry right now, because I did. I absolutely loved it. However, it's time to try something a little bit different. So I will do a full video about what I plan on doing now and kind of explaining the reasons why I left and everything like that. So if you have any questions about it, please leave them down in the comments down below, and I will respond to them in kind of like a why I left education video that I plan on filming next week. But it is a very exciting time, and I'm very excited for this change. And once again, scared, so unbelievably scared, but also excited. So with that out of the way, I will have a lot more time to read in November, so my November TBR is going to be very ambitious. There are some very chunky fantasy and fantasy romance books that I really want to get to in November, so I am very much looking forward to talking about these books with you guys. Now, if you're unfamiliar with my channel, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday. If you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. You can also hit that notification bell to be notified whenever I post new bookish content. You can also check out my Instagram, Goodreads, and Patreon, all linked down below. With all that out of the way, let's talk about all the books I want to read in November. Alright guys, so first up is my Patreon book club pick for November. If you are unfamiliar with my Patreon, every month my patrons get to vote between 3 different fantasy romance books, and whichever one gets the most votes, I will add that book to our Discord, where we will discuss the book as we are reading it. And then at the end of the month, or at the beginning of the following month, we will have a live show where we'll discuss all about the book. So, by a landslide, the winner was Quicksilver by Callie Hart. I have had this book on, I think, every single TBR I have made this year. I have been dying to get to this. I actually started it physically, but I ended up putting it down. However, the audiobook is finally dropping at the end of October. The day that audiobook drops, which I believe is this coming Tuesday, I will be binging this book because I've heard nothing but amazing things. I've been trying not to ruin the plot for myself, but what I know about this book is we are following this girl that I believe is a thief and somehow opens a portal into this like snowy hellscape where she meets this guy who is a fae named Kingfisher, and they become like magically bound to each other. And I think he's trying to use her for his own gains. And it goes from there. I've heard this book has amazing banter. I've just heard it's so unbelievably good. I know my friend April and my friend Hannah both absolutely loved it. So I know it's going to be a 5-star. So if you are not part of my Patreon, definitely consider joining. I have a feeling this is going to be a really fun live show. And next up, I'll be reading Vows Ruins, which is the second book in the Legends of Thezmarr series that I'm reading as part of a read-along over on my Patreon. So every month, we are reading a book from the Legend of Thezmarr series and then having a live show at the end of the month kind of discussing it. So in October, we read Blood and Steel, and actually our live show for that is tomorrow when I'm currently filming this. So I am very much looking forward to the Blood and Steel live show. I had so much fun with our last Patreon read-along, which was Throne of Glass. However, I'd already read that series, so I wasn't really discovering anything new. Unlike the Legend of Thezmarr series, where I feel like I'm learning about these characters and just getting to experience everything with you guys, and I am loving it so much. So if you're unfamiliar with the Legend of Thezmarr series, I really can't get into anything that happens in book 2, but in book 1, we are following this girl that lives in this group of people that women are no longer allowed to be warriors, so they have to be alchemists and do other things. However, our main character really wants to fight, and although it is illegal in this community for women to possess a certain type of weapon, she ends up uncovering one. It's actually gifted to her, and she starts practicing with it. And after a while of practicing, she's discovered, and she ends up having to fight and kind of earn her place in this warrior group, and there are trials. It definitely has all of like the Witcher vibes, and I really enjoyed it. So I'm very excited to see where this story is going to go, and hopefully I enjoy book 2 as much as I enjoyed book 1. And next up is Riftborne. This is a adult romantasy. I believe it's a debut novel. And in this story, we are following Thea, and she is trying to survive in this city that is filled with prejudice, and she is harboring a secret that she has this power that is growing within her. And one day, that power ends up being unleashed. I believe some people end up kind of getting caught in the crossfire, and then she is kind of faced with this impossible decision: either join this group that she is very much against or die. And she ends up, I believe, joining. She meets a general, and the story goes from there. Now, I haven't really looked too much into this because I don't want it spoiled for myself, but I am very excited about this romantasy. I love enemies to lovers. It sounds like it's going to have a ton of action. And this book is absolutely stunning. I do believe this is the special edition version, and it has a ribbon, which I very much appreciate. I believe it was my friend April from Happily Ever April that mentioned that she really loves ribbons in special editions because it's a built-in bookmark. And now it is something I actively look for when buying special edition books. But I'm really hoping the audiobook for this drops in November. So this is kind of like a tentative November, possibly December read, just because I am waiting for the audiobook, but there is one in production, so hopefully it releases soon. And next up is Nectar of the Wicked by Ella Fields. Now, I just talked about this book in my fantasy romance TBR, so I'm not going to go too in-depth, but just know that Ella Fields is one of my favorite fantasy romance authors, and she is incredibly underhyped. I feel like not enough people talk about her works, and they are so good. A King So Cold and The Wolf and the Wildflower being 2 of my absolute favorites, and I'm very excited to pick this up. I'm pretty sure this is also going to end up being a 5-star. So in this story, we are following a changeling girl who has had no idea who she is, where she comes from, even her name, for the last 20 years. And then she ends up meeting this mysterious and wicked fae who tells her he will help her discover who she truly is in exchange for her hand in marriage. And it goes from there. All of that sounds amazing, and I know I'm going to love this. I was just waiting for that audiobook, and it is finally out. So I will definitely be reading this in early November. And next up is Under the Oak Tree, which is based off a webtoon that I was absolutely obsessed with as it was releasing. So this collection is going to be released in the beginning of November, and the story is following the daughter of a duke who lives a very isolated life. Her family's almost embarrassed by her, so she ends up in an arranged marriage with this very low-born knight, and their wedding night ends up being a little bit of a disaster. And then her new husband has to go away for 3 years to fight off in a war, and he returns as a decorated war hero, and it's really just following their romance, and it's so addicting and angsty and good, and I just loved it. So I believed that this was going to be like a Lore Olympus type thing. However, I just saw that it's also releasing via audio, so it might actually be releasing as a novel. Either way, I love the story so much. I've already pre-ordered both formats, so it should be really, really good. But if you have not checked out Under the Oak Tree yet, highly, highly recommend. And next up, we have Heart of Night and Fire, and this was pitched as being an addictive, slow burn romance. So in this story, we are following a former captive who has been forbidden from using her powers, and she is able to eventually escape, and she goes to this city that is being overrun by demons. Then she begins to figure out that her powers might be somehow connected to the demons and has to decide if she is willing to learn and unleash her power. And I believe while all of this is going on, there is a romance in there somewhere. But it sounds really good, and I'm really hoping this is a 5-star. All right, and this next book is a little out of my typical genre. It is a straight-up fantasy. It is The Sword of Kaigen. Now, I do not know very much about this book other than it is incredibly thick, and it is following a mother and son. I believe there is a lot of action and politics, and it made 2 very important people to me cry, and I promised them I would read this book. So enter my husband and my friend Issa. Issa is also a content creator. She gives the best fantasy recommendations on the planet. She also just hit 20K, so please, if you are not following Issa from Fun Fantasy Books, check out her channel. But these 2 people are the reason I will be reading Sword of Kaigen. So Issa tried to get me to read Sword of Kaigen, I think 2 years ago, at least last year. She said it was one of the best books she ever read, and I just didn't have time at that point, and for some reason I didn't pick it up. I did end up picking up The Will of the Many, which is another book she recommended I read, so I did read that, and I loved it. But anyway, I never got to it. My husband, on the other hand, did actually read it, and he loved it. So I then had Issa and Scott both telling me I need to read this book. Well, then my loving husband was so sweet and read all of ACOTAR, Fourth Wing, Iron Flame, and then When the Moon Hatched, and a few other of my books, and I have still not read a single one that he has requested that I read. And Issa has also read many fantasy romance books that I've recommended, even though that is not the typical genre she reads, and I have only read The Will of the Many by her. So I have decided it is time for my redemption. I am going to read this book because they both think I will love it, and they both know me so well. They are two of the most important people in my life. So I am going to read this book in November. I promised both of them I would have it read by Thanksgiving, and that is the goal. So I'm probably going to read it in like sections because once again, it is incredibly lengthy, but I have very high hopes. So this is another book I will definitely be reading in November. And next up is The Half King. I believe this is FairyLoot's October Romantasy pick, and this cover is absolutely gorgeous, but honestly, with this particular book, the artwork that came inside, I actually prefer over the cover. It is so, so pretty. But I believe the story is following a girl who is the second born in her family, and in this world, what your birth order is really matters in life. So she is the second born, and she is not supposed to do anything very important with her life, and she ends up going to this kingdom where the prince is cursed with this like blood curse that he turns to Shadow Daddy, and eventually on his 21st birthday, he's going to turn to Shadow entirely. And I believe she's trying to prevent that, and the story goes from there. But I haven't heard very much about this. However, Shadow Daddy is like my absolute fave, so I feel like this book was tailor-made for me. It's kind of giving me The Shadows Between Us by, I forget the author, Levenseller. Trisha Levenseller. It kind of reminds me of that story a little bit, so I'm very interested to see if they're similar, but this will be another book that I read in November. If you've read this, let me know, what did you rate it? Once again, I haven't heard a lot of people talking about this book. And next up is the first book in a series that I have been wanting to pick up for so long, solely based off of how gorgeous these covers are. So first up is The Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Demon. So this is the first book in the Mead Mishaps series, I believe, but they are like cozy fantasy romance books and they sound so unbelievably good. So this book was so kindly sent to me from Kat, who is my friend over on Bookstagram and Patreon. Thank you so much, Kat. You were one of the first people to talk to me about this series, and I am really hoping I love it as much as you do, because I know you really enjoyed this series. But I don't know very much about the plot. I feel like this is very good to go in completely blind, but I know this is the demon, and then she ends up being saved by, I believe, this guy who's trying to save his people, and I think they team up. But anyway, I haven't read a ton of cozy fantasy, so I'm very curious to see if I end up really enjoying this, but this will be another book I pick up in November. And last up, and the only contemporary romance on this list, we have Older by Jennifer Hartmann. Now, I'm going to be completely honest, I'm actually currently halfway into reading this. I thought I would have it finished by the time I went to film this TBR and the wrap-up I'm going to film after this. However, I am not finished, so I will definitely have this finished in early November, probably the first day of November. But this is a age gap, best friend's dad romance. I will say the beginning is really hard to get through. Definitely check trigger warnings. I will somewhat spoil this, death of an animal. I'm really not okay with those types of things, and it does happen at the beginning of this, so make sure you're prepared. But this story is following Haley like the comet, and she comes from this very broken home life, and she ends up being taken in by her best friend's family. It's a single mother and daughter, and she lives there for a while. She's finally getting her life back on track, only to discover that her best friend's father is this older guy that she met at a party and had this instant connection with. And that is as far as I am in this book, but so far I am absolutely loving it. This was actually gifted to me in a boo basket by one of the people I was working with, and although we had like just met and I was kind of training her in her new position, she was so effing sweet, and I can't believe she bought me this book. So if you are watching this, thank you so much. I don't know if you feel okay with having your name out there on the internet, so just know, thank you. This meant so much to me, and it made that day just a little bit better. All right, guys, that is it for my November TBR. Thank you guys so much for watching, and please let me know down in the comments below, what book are you most looking forward to reading in November? And if you guys have any good recs for me, please leave them in the comments down below. And I'd like to say a special thank you to my Paladin protectors, Amanda, Erin, Leslie, Kat, and Lada. Thank you guys so much for supporting my channel. And I said this already, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday, and if you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. I will see you all next week. Bye.